There we go. Hello, Kate. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you for the invitation to join you.
Well, I've been wanting to have this conversation for quite some time. I think what we're about to delve into is an important and popular topic that the Beyond Trauma listeners are going to be very excited to hear about. And you are the person to ask all my burning questions about journaling and therapeutic writing.
Okay, fire away, whatever you want to ask me. As I say to my clients, I will explore with you whatever you want to explore. There's nothing
Oh,
off limits.
okay, so we don't know where this might go. Let's start we'll start with the basics. Like, just to give us a broad idea of journaling. I mean, I know most of us know what journaling is. Almost every store we go into, there's a beautiful journal calling our names, and I know many people, buying and keeping journals on shelves. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about like the history of journaling and how you got into journaling as a topic and why journaling is so popular and exciting.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I need to say there is no wrong way to journal. Often
Okay.
people think there are rules that they have to follow, and people say to me, "Oh, I'm not very good at journaling."
Yes. Yes.
And as you said, people keep journals on the shelf. So the first thing to say is whatever journaling works for you is the right way to do it.
Mm, I like that, just to take the pressure off right from the start.
Yes. But
Yeah.
what's important for me is the way people are able to reflect on what they've written. So, journaling is the writing, it's often very cathartic or descriptive. But going back and reading and reflecting on what you've written can be the most powerful part of it as a therapeutic medium.
Yeah, so I definitely wanted to ask you about that. I noticed that from reading your book that that's an important element, and one that I haven't always heard, haven't always used. I have a few times in my life. So you highly suggest that no matter what we write, it's important to go back and take a look at it.
It can uncover the real issues, the real insights, just by going back and reading it and then
Hmm.
just writing a little bit of
Yeah.
reflection on what you've written previously that says something like, when I read this, I notice that what I'm really talking about or what I'm not talking about is, or when I
Oh.
read this, I see I've been writing the same thing for the last 5 years and I think it's time to move on.
Oh, wow, yeah. Yeah, so at what point would one read what they've written? Is it something, um, right after you've written it that you'd read back, or do you want some space from it? Obviously, you're talking about some longer term patterns.
It can be both. It can be, if you've written about something that feels like it's got some juice in it, then reading it immediately and reflecting on it can distill what's in there. But people can also go back and look at a whole finished journal from some time ago and just notice and keep that loop going.
Mm. Yeah, that's fantastic. So we have some options there. We can kind of look at it right away. We can reflect on it, what's happened over the last week. We can look at where we were years ago
Yeah.
and where we've come.
Yes, you mean like when you meet that teenage self on the page again 20 years later.
I've definitely done that. I've kept old diaries and journals and occasionally, cleaning out a closet, opened one up and it's frightening.
Well, is it more frightening to recognize what's there or not to recognize it?
That's right. That's right. So that's really helpful. So looking for patterns, looking for what we're not saying, what was omitted. I always like that. That's really deep. Um, and what are some of the deeper subtext to why we're writing about or why we keep revisiting a topic in our writing?
That's right. And another thing I would say is, along with this no wrong way to do it, there are lots of techniques for journaling, and flow writing is one, but especially with, as you will know, with trauma, there needs to be some containment.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, so should we talk about I mean, you have so many great prompts. Should we talk first a little bit generally about some of the general prompts or ways people might want to explore their writing, and then get into a little bit of some of the more qualifiers for trauma?
Okay, so, well, where would you like to start with this?
Oh, let's say, I want to start journaling. Um, and I don't know, I'm sitting with the journal. I don't know what to write. I don't know how long to write, how often to write. And I know there's no wrong way, but sometimes too many choices is overwhelming, right?
Yes.
So, what would be some fruitful ways for someone who wants to go a bit deeper, right? People listening to the podcast, they're yoga people, they're health professionals. They maybe want to go a little bit deeper. How would you recommend they get started?
Okay, well, two things come to mind, and one is my favorite journal prompts that's so simple and so wide. So it's really, really simple, Laura, this one.
Okay.
It's simply, who am I? Why am I here? What do I want?
Wow. Who am I? Why am I here? What do I want?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you can see how simple those questions are and how complex they are.
Yeah. And a question, that those series of questions, I could imagine from day to day. Like if I just sat with those questions, how I might feel different each day. And who am I?
That's right. And every day will bring up different answers, which is interesting. And you can approach them in a very concrete way, you know, literal way, or you can talk as widely as you want. You can go as abstract as you want. And as you say, yes, they are different every time. So that's a wonderful one to do for a period of time every day, and then to reflect on it and what you notice over time.
I got the chills. Yeah.
But an even more simple one, if somebody is really just starting, is to start with where you are and
Hmm.
to describe where you are, but to go as deeply into the language of the senses as possible, so that it
Yeah.
keeps it really present, what you can smell, what you can hear.
Hmm. I really like that because it reminds me so much of mindfulness, of presence. Do you find that the practice of journal writing can connect to mindfulness?
Most definitely, yes, because like yoga, like music, like all these mindful practices, writing happens in the here and now as a
Yeah.
physical process. And if people remember that and start with where you are, I think that can be really, really powerful. And a mindfulness practice, always writing in the present tense, even if you're writing about a memory.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So if for those who really want to go into the mindfulness aspect, stay in the present tense when we're writing.
Yes. And stay in the language of the senses.
See, this is very helpful.
Yes.
Yeah, I've written many times. I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. So this is very helpful.
Yes, and I don't know what to write repeated a number of times leads into knowing what to write, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it does. It does. But having some helpful prompts and thinking of this from yeah, from the senses and a mindfulness perspective is really lovely. I noticed also when reading your book that you also like to use existentialism in your writing, can in your or your writing invitations. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Right. Well, I am an existential therapist, so I have a talking therapy practice into which I like to bring writing as often as possible. But the earlier prompts that we were talking about, they're very existential, you know,
Yeah.
meaning based, value based. What's really important to me right now, which is another great prompt. What's really important to me right now, because that will bring up different things every single time.
And the existential, theoretical orientation really looks at um, meaning, right? What
Absolutely.
do I want my life to mean in the end? Um,
Yes.
and I like that, and I think a lot about that, which means I think a lot about death, and um, which helps me to make better decisions in how I'm living. I wonder um, just how those ideas tie in for you.
Well, death is one of the favorite subjects of existentialism and existential therapy. Ideas of mortality and the finiteness of
Yeah,
life. And so journaling is obviously a way to create a sense of that, to think about what do I need to do? In the words of Mary Oliver, what do I want to do with my one precious life?
yes.
Mm.
And what's the difference between writing these things down as opposed to just thinking about them?
Okay, well, that's a really, really great question because people often say to me, when I see what I've written, I know I exist.
Mm,
There's something about putting the self on the page and receiving it back in the reading of it creates creates something that exists outside of the self but can be taken back into the self. And
mm,
as well as that, the kind of ruminations that we can get stuck in if we're thinking about them that can go round and round and round. When we start to put them on the page and externalize them, again, they're not there filling our head. We've put them somewhere. And then we can think about them rather than having them filling our thoughts. And once you can think
yeah.
about something, you're not going to be so completely overwhelmed by it.
I know a lot of people can relate to that, having thoughts, especially at the end of the day, and just having a paper by the side of the bed. So
Mhm.
I know
Mhm.
when those people, I mean me. So, sometimes just if I know it's written down and I won't forget it, then I can stop thinking about it.
Yes, yes, it's there, and I can come back to it when I feel ready.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a kind of emptying out.
Yes, but not letting it evaporate, which thoughts, alone would do, I think.
Yes. Yes. That's beautiful. And, um, does that mean we should keep our journals? I know some people have rituals of writing things they want to get rid of and throwing them away or burning them. Should we always keep them to come back to?
Well, I'm a great advocate for keeping them, putting them away. Even some people will give them to somebody else to look after if they feel, they're a little bit inflammatory or something. But
Hmm.
writing something and mindfully destroying it can be a wonderfully cathartic exercise. Mm,
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a separate project.
definitely, yes. For
Got it.
example, this is a funny little story. I had a client who was very angry with her abusive husband, and she managed to leave him, and she was writing angry unsent letters, and we can talk more about that later. But she took great delight in tearing them up and flushing them down the lavatory.
Yes.
It felt like a really cathartic way of saying to him, that's all you're worth. You're gone.
Yes. Oh, I'd love to hear more stories like that or practices that you might recommend for folks who have been through abuse or trauma.
Mm. Well, one way we think of trauma is a rupture of the narrative,
Mm,
and writing is a way of recreating a narrative.
yeah.
Mm. And I have found that there are people who can write about things before they can speak them.
Yeah. So that's almost like a recommendation maybe for other therapists or
Mm.
uh, if they're working with someone who just really can't talk about it, they might offer some journaling.
Yes, yes, because that allows the client also to be in control of the pacing of the
Mm.
experience of the therapy. One of my first ever um, clients who started to write, she came in one day and she gave me a note, and the note said, "We'll leave the rape on the shelf for now."
Wow.
But I
Wow.
kept that note and I'd take it out and show it to her, and she'd say no. But eventually she was able to start writing about it.
Wow.
Long time before we could actually talk about it.
Did she share her writing with you during that time?
Eventually, and I think there's a staged process to writing about trauma in therapy in particular, if you'd like to know some more about that.
Oh, you know I would. Yes.
The first thing is for the client to write and keep it very private.
Okay.
The next stage is for the client possibly to give it to the therapist before the client can even read her own or his own work. And then there's another stage which might be then the therapist reading it out loud.
And then the client is hearing it.
Yes. And
Yeah.
after that, maybe the conversation can start.
Hmm.
Mm.
And does the writing happen in the office or is it homework?
It's usually done outside of the office, but if somebody becomes very overwhelmed, then I might say, "Would you like to just spend a few minutes writing about what's happening for you right now?"
Hmm. And I know for trauma, um, there's been some research on therapeutic writing. Um, I believe it's Pennebaker who's
Yeah.
had some of the most extensive research or widely quoted. Um, and I wonder, do you follow those practices?
The Pennybaker paradigm, which was the very first therapeutic writing paradigm, yes, that was hugely influential. And things I take away from that I will share with my clients is that when you're doing therapeutic writing, you know, start with a time limited write. Maybe, I mean, Pennybaker's are 20 minutes, but I might even say start with 10 minutes, set the timer, decide if you want to continue after that, but know that you can stop at that point and to really take care of yourself.
Hmm.
Yes. And
Noticing what you're feeling.
yes, and if you need to take time out, that's okay. Make sure you
Yeah.
have something in place for after, that is good
Mm.
for you. Mm.
Yeah, so making sure that there's a plan because if you've brought all this stuff up and you haven't kind of, created a plan for what am I going to do after now that I've brought everything up to the surface. I wonder, do people have um memories come back through the writing process?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
And they might even not know that until they read what they've written.
Ah, so it can be coming through you.
Yes,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. And so again, that's why reading it is so powerful, but can also be quite, overwhelming. So you might want to, if you know yourself well enough, you'll know where to set your boundaries.
Mhm.
Yes.
And that's something someone can work on as well with their therapist. It's like, noticing when they're dysregulated and having some
That's
of
right.
that work in place before even they go to try
Yes.
to start writing.
And knowing what their grounding exercises can be. I've often wondered what the connection would be between doing some yoga first and then doing the
Mhm.
writing and then doing some more yoga maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I think yoga is such even a few minutes, is so powerful for clearing the channel. I always talk about that.
Yes.
Um, and just getting us, in the right mindset for any activity.
Yes.
Yeah. And sitting, it's it some people say that that the physical practice of yoga was originally created to get ready to sit for longer meditation. So, I mean, you're sitting, you're writing, it's kind of it could be a lot on the body if you're sitting for a long
Absolutely.
time.
Yeah.
So even preparing your vessel, your body for, a kind of comfortable seat where you could write, fluidly and you're not achy and you have to shift every minute. Could be something.
That makes perfect sense. Yes. What's your phrase to clear the channel, to prepare the vessel so that yeah, because writing is a physical act,
It is.
even if
Yeah.
it's typing.
And you say typing's okay.
I think I have to think it's okay, but I do advocate for using a pen
Yeah.
and a flow of the pen on the paper. And again,
Nothing like it.
research has shown that it activates different parts of the brain.
Yeah. Nothing like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did use some of Pennebaker's research for on my own, a traumatic experience that happened to me in the past year. And I think it's something like sitting down 3 or 4 times,
Yes.
writing the experience, and you're supposed to write like what were feeling and insight. There's I think a bit about the insight that you're
Yeah.
gaining from it.
Yes.
Uh,
And his research discovered that it was most efficacious if you wrote about if you described the event and wrote about the feelings that you were having.
yeah,
And I would say that the feelings that you're having as you're writing from the, which are happening in the present, as well
yeah.
as the feelings you had when the event was taking place.
Yes. And I'm just as you're saying that, I'm thinking about the reprocessing of the memory that's happening.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because we know with trauma, um, that traumatic memories are not processed the same way
Right.
um, as our quote unquote regular memory. So I can see where that can help to just process that memory through, especially as you're saying, if we're aware of our senses, of our breathing, everything in that moment that we're writing.
Yes. And I think that also, yes, by writing, you're creating something which you can then make a memory which you can take back into autobiographical memory, as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to the memory where the trauma is held, which is often non-verbal. So you're
Exactly.
integrating it. Writing is another way of integrating it.
Yeah, that's like almost circles back to our kind of narrative framework. So it's like everything is in there.
Yes, yes. And another technique that's so useful in trauma work and in therapeutic writing is the unsent letter.
Tell us about that.
Okay. It's a technique that I use a lot with clients, very useful in bereavement, but also very, very useful in childhood trauma. And people would often say, "Oh, yes, you need to write a letter to your abuser." And it was Eve Ensler, wasn't it? Now known as V. who wrote a book called The Apology, in which she wrote to her father who had abused her, and then she wrote from him because that was where.
Mm,
But I would say the first unsent letter is to the abused child self,
yeah.
the part that is often split off and unloved, and but to start to accept that part again, and the writing a letter from your adult self to that child self.
Mm.
It's hard but beautiful.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounds like advanced.
Well, the next stage is then to write from that child self to your adult self, because that child has been unvoiced
Yep.
very often. And so learning to give that child a voice again
Mm.
and ask questions. Yes.
Are there some recommended questions, or is there anything recommended that either the adult should use as a framework to the child, or that the child might want to ask, or should we let it flow naturally?
Let it flow, but be free to ask any questions. Like to ask the child, what did you want?
Yeah.
What do you want to know from me? Yes. How could I have helped you? Or what did you
Yeah.
need? Those sort of questions.
I'm thinking, what are you still needing? Right?
What
If
are you
that part is
still
still,
needing? Beautiful, yeah.
yeah, because now you're drawing me into parts work. You're taking me everywhere.
It really
Yeah.
is parts work, yes.
Yeah.
And then maybe write some unsent letters to the other adults who were around,
Mm,
who didn't
yeah.
protect, because that's often the where a lot of the anger can usefully be directed.
Yeah. Well, that unsent letter writing seems like that could be a big project.
Yes, it's a complete treatment plan.
It is.
And only at the end write the letter to the abuser.
Okay. Yeah. Not rushing right to that, as some have unwisely told people to maybe a little bit too early in their process, right?
Exactly, exactly. You've got
Yeah.
to start with very simple language, which is why writing to the small child can be helpful.
And it seems like this project, while if one feels capable and ready where they are in their lives, we wouldn't stop anyone, but it just feels like one might want to be working with a therapist at this time, because that's pretty deep work.
It's extremely deep work, it's reparative work, but it's also, there are dangers around working with trauma, as you know.
Yeah.
And I would say therapists sometimes say to their clients, just go and write a journal.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very scary. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to help them contain whatever is
The
out there?
container is so important. Yeah. So you're doing the work really first of helping them to understand their window of tolerance, their nervous system, their grounding techniques, what's in the schedule that day, the basics of like, and how we're gonna really keep a safe container around this. And if someone's not prepared to do that, then they're just opening up a can of worms, as they say, without supports.
Exactly, re traumatizing.
Yeah. I like the idea which you mentioned earlier of you or the therapist reading some of the journaling back. It's making me feel like a lot would be gained by hearing my words reflected back to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you notice that, or if there's anything coming to mind to share about that experience.
Well, actually, quite recently, I had a client who had written about it was a recovered memory, really,
Yeah.
um, but couldn't bear to read it. And so I read it to them very slowly, and we stopped and we noticed what was happening in their body, what was only pacing it to the stage, to the limit where they could take in a chunk.
Mm.
Yes, and yes, having it's like, I mean, that's the premise of therapy, isn't it? You give your therapist all the unbearable stuff, and they give it back to you in a way that you can tolerate and take in.
Mm. Oh, that's a beautiful framework for therapy. I love that. um, and I know you've seen some really um, big benefits to folks who work with journaling. I recently had someone on the podcast to talk about narcissistic personality, and she went through a abuse of a mother, and she had chronic pain. Um,
I know her.
oh, you do?
No, I don't know her, but I know
you
someone
you know her.
who's had
So,
that. Yeah, and you will know more than I do about the somatization of trauma and pain and so on.
well, she found journaling particularly helpful for her healing process, and really said that it helped with that chronic pain. So pretty powerful.
Yeah. And for that, I might recommend somebody writes a dialogue with the body or a dialogue with the pain to see what they can learn from it, from the symptom. What's it trying to tell them? Why is it
Mm,
there?
there's so many techniques
Yes.
depending on what we're going for, um and I guess we could just be journaling forever using, your prompts here.
Yes, and containment. Structure, pacing, and containment are very important so that it doesn't become overwhelming and it doesn't become a replacement for living.
Can that happen? Do people get addicted to journaling?
I think so. I mean, haven't you had that feeling that you could just go on, and there's always a bit more, and there's a bit more?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So setting a time, a kind of cap on that time.
yeah. And I think it's helpful, as with yoga or any of these other things, to have it as a practice. You know,
Hmm.
I like to write in the morning. Other people like to write before they go to bed.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think, and I know you started by saying there's no rules, but I I do think having a structure, having a time of day, even a place. I say the same thing with folks who want to have their own home yoga practice, like a special room or a corner of a room or a
Yes.
table. It's just those things make it happen more easily. It's just like we know, like now I'm in my writing place, and it just starts to happen.
Do you think that's something about not having to make a decision, but just
Yes.
knowing that's almost your body and your mind know that's what we're going to do?
Yes. I think it's much easier to do something every day than some days.
Yes.
Yeah. When we take the decision making out of it, wow, we take a lot of struggle away and we can just flow.
I think that's, yes, it takes the struggle, the dilemma, the self talk, yes,
Yep. And I think that's a useful tool for any practice you want to get into.
yes. And it doesn't
Yeah.
have to take up hours, it can only be 15 minutes. 15 minutes counts. So, to people who say, I don't have time to journal, that's what I say, 15 minutes counts.
Yeah. Sometimes I just do a few minutes in the evening, just reflecting on the day, and a few minutes in the morning, just reflecting on, what kind of person I want to be in the day, how I want to approach the day ahead.
Isn't that a great journal prompt?
Yeah.
Who is the person I want to be in my day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it really, I mean, just that. And sometimes it's very brief for me, is enough to make sure that the day is not running me.
Beautifully said. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That I'm intentional about, how I'm showing up in my relationships
And on the page.
and on the page. I mean, I want to take this where you want to go. Tell me, what have we not gotten into that's important for you to share?
Poetry.
Yeah.
Can I read you a poem? Because I often, when I do groups, I do like to start with a poem, and every poem is just a collection of journal prompts. Yes. So, and this is one of the ones I use with trauma and with groups generally, and it's called Reinvent Your Life by Charles Bukowski. And it's invent yourself and then reinvent yourself. Don't swim in the same slough. Invent yourself and then reinvent yourself and stay out of the clutches of mediocrity. Invent yourself and then reinvent yourself. Change your tone and shape so often that they can never categorize you. Reinvigorate yourself and accept what is, but only on the terms that you have invented and reinvented. Be self-taught and reinvent your life because you must. It is your life and its history and the present belong only to you.
Hmm. What called that poem to you?
Reinvent your life. So many times when we go through trauma, when we go through transition, to do it intentionally, to take back control of that.
Hmm.
And a lot of people, and I include myself in this, things happen to us that are that rupture again. And then if we can invent ourselves and reinvent ourselves, it's an acknowledgement that that's the wheel of life, that's the process. And I find it really, really encouraging to
Hmm.
think that
Yeah.
I can develop that agency again, and I would use writing with that. Who am I now? Who am I beginning to be?
Yeah.
Mm,
I like that it takes us out of like, this thing is happening to me,
exactly. Yes.
and it's a much more empowering framework.
Yes. And to live your life, not to have life just carrying on without you. Mm.
Yes. Yes. And we have to reinvent ourselves. So it's either going to be done for us or we're going to get in there and be at least in collaboration with that process.
The collaborative process of living with ourselves.
I love how this work has touched you personally as well as professionally.
Well, my own history of journaling, I started as a child keeping a diary and so on. Turbulent teenage years, it was how I made sense of some of those things. But yes, I've suffered a lot of traumatic loss in my own life, and writing can really, really help with that. The Canadian poet Anne Michaels says, just because somebody dies, that's no reason to stop writing them letters.
Mm,
So I have a personal ritual of my father died 30 years ago, but I still write him letters from time to time.
that's beautiful.
Yes. But the other side of writing is that sometimes a trauma feels like the story has been taken away.
That's
And
right.
after my husband died very suddenly, I couldn't write. It was like there were no words. And so gradually I've started to be able to put words to the experience. But it's a very slow and, yeah, painful experience. But to write it and read it is empowering, and it is a way of repossessing my own experience. So I do use it for myself as much as with other people.
And I think that's always like nice to know, right? As when someone is recommending someone or using a tool that they've had that personal experience with it. So I appreciate you sharing those
Thank you.
more personal stories. And I'm sorry about your husband, and I wonder what it was like for someone who's so connected to writing and words to feel without words.
It was it was horrible. It felt like a double deprivation in a way, because if writing is my way of making sense of the world, but then what happened felt so senseless. But
Mm,
uh, I know the first time I went to a yoga class after that happened, after my husband died, I just sobbed the whole way through.
yeah.
So that won't surprise you, will it?
We get a lot of tears on the yoga mat.
Yeah, so what
Yeah.
is it about yoga that just releases something that has been so held?
Yeah. There, sometimes it's a space, right? Just feeling that one's in a space where they can do that. And of course, our breath and our emotions are so intimately connected. So when there's any kind of feeling, um,
Yes,
we tend to restrict, we hold our breath, we breathe in tightly, our breath gets short and rapid. So
yeah.
as we start to relax, all that stuff we've been holding
Mm.
starts to come out.
So I think
Yeah.
we really are uncovering real parallels between yoga and writing as releases in a safe and, managed way. And
Yes.
that's where I disagree with Penny Baker, if I'm allowed to
Oh,
speak.
tell us. Yes. I love a good.
Because in his first, when he was first developing the paradigm, his injunction or his instruction to people was to write about the most important and devastating and deep thing you can think of.
Mm,
Well, maybe not yet.
right.
I want people to have permission to manage their self-disclosure, their ability to to address something like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think even with like practices, even like all the reprocessing, even like EMDR, they don't always say do the strongest memory. You can use one of your first
Right.
memories, you can use a most recent. So you don't necessarily want to just go right in with take your time. This is a
Terrifying.
process. Yeah. Tell us well, actually, let's stay with poetry for a moment, because that seems important and important to you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I do think that in trauma, poetry is really, really helpful because it's short, it's deep, it's concise. And if people can't take in, you wouldn't necessarily read a novel after a traumatic experience or a bereavement, but you might be able to read or even write a poem. And I would say poetry writing is a journal practice.
Okay.
And some people's journals are poems. And another technique is to go back into your journal and find the poem.
Yes, I love that idea.
Yes, or find,
That is a beautiful idea.
yes, you might find the first line in your free writing that you can take and go deeper, deeper, deeper into a poem. Mm.
Yeah, a lot of things are connecting for me right now. I'm thinking about um, just how shock and loss and trauma can leave us speechless.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so finding the words again, as you know, you reflected on your experience. Um, and I know, you know, just times in my life where just like words weren't coming and how scary that was. Um, and we kind of have to rest and allow them to come, and poetry might be a softer way to,
Yes.
yeah,
And
to enter the world of words again.
yes, and metaphor.
Yeah.
If you can't, what is it? Emily Dickinson says, "Tell the truth, but tell it slant."
Hmm.
If it's too difficult to look at it head on.
Yes. What are there some other poems or poets that you like to work with?
Well, David White and his work with nature and being and putting those two ideas together and slowing things down. It's very beautiful. Um, Rainer Maria Rilke. Would you like to
Yes.
hear another poem?
I would. I would. I could sit and listen to you recite poetry for a long, long time.
And this is an encouragement um, to go out into the world, but it might be the interior world, and it's called.
Should we recommend that folks, if they want to, might pause and get a pen and paper to write after hearing this
Oh,
poem?
absolutely, absolutely, and this
If you
is
want to try it?
yes. So yes, because I think you'll like this as a sort of mindfulness exercise as well. So this is Entrance by Rilke, translated by Dana Joya. Whoever you are, step out of doors tonight, out of the room that lets you feel secure. Infinity is open to your sight, whoever you are. With eyes that have forgotten how to see, from viewing things already too well known, lift up into the dark a huge black tree and put it in the heavens all alone. And you have made the world and all you see. It ripens like the words still in your mouth. And when at last you comprehend its truth, then close your eyes and gently set it free.
Hmm.
And so when you're ready, you can open your eyes and pick up your pen and just let the words still in your mouth come out onto the page.
I love that. And I think it's wonderful to give folks an exercise, and we'll encourage people to take as long a pause as they'd like and reflect on that beautiful poem, or go back and and reflect on the first one if that
Mm.
um, resonated with you. Yeah, you're bringing up a lot for me. I wrote a poem recently, also as a kind of processing, as a processing of a loss, um, and I hadn't fully connected all those dots until this moment. So thank you.
Because when you can start to put words to the loss, I wouldn't say it makes it more bearable or manageable, but it gives it a shape, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I hadn't written a poem in so long. Um,
Mm.
I'm probably not alone in thinking like poetry sometimes feels to me like it has to be really, really special and really, really good. um, and yeah, and I used to write a lot more. Um, and it was really, I'm really proud of that poem. It's actually going to be to be published. It'll probably come out around the time that we release this, so that'll be kind of
Beautiful.
fun. Yeah,
Maybe you could read it on the
yeah.
podcast.
Should I read my poem?
I'd love to hear it if you've got it there.
Oh, I think I could pull it up. Okay. Oh, we'll see how this goes, right? This is the poem is called Cherry Tomatoes. Okay. The cherry tomatoes split open this year, overwhelmed by the rainfall. I still don't know from where our water comes, though I've looked at the map now many times. We are in the shed. And the reservoirs, it seems, are for New York City, where my farmer's market was a block away and open on Saturday, not only Mittwoch, but maybe Mittwoch too. Mittwoch is German for Wednesday, the secret name of my unborn child, who was also wolf and wren and win. I like to name things, so I go about learning names: garlic mustard, goldenrod, horseweed, plantain, and yellow dock, till my head bursts like the cherry tomatoes the year we got all that rain. The year the kale was tall as my head, and I ate dandelion leaves from my yard to save $8 from our hump day farmer's market. I learn other names too: hemlock, ash, sugar maple, and beech, and how to recite them correctly deep in the winter months. Maybe naming these water carriers will fill the thing that can't be filled. Maybe I should ask my husband. I'm sure he knows what to do when the water slips through the weaves of a basket or bursts through the skin of a green solenum. He's a Wasserbearer by sun and moon, and he carries his load so light while I'm full each month, but not with her. They buy me a Dracania for Mother's Day, but they really shouldn't. I kill every plant. My thumb is better used to hail a cab.
Oh, that is so beautiful. And it's all in there, isn't it?
Thank you for that invitation.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing that.
You said unexpected things were going to happen.
Yes. And I think that poem will speak to other women in their loss, because
Thank you.
that's
I hope so.
another thing poetry can do. It can unite us in sharing and acknowledging the unbearable.
Mm,
Mm,
yeah. And nature, and we've touched a lot on nature,
yes.
without saying it, bluntly as now. But there seems to be something about nature as well that's so often in poetry and in
Mhm.
healing is in healing.
Yes. I know for me, in my healing, the nature has been the greatest solace. Mm,
Yeah, same. I
mm,
spend a lot of time meditating outside and
yes.
slow walking through the natural world.
Yes. And don't you find that when you're walking in the natural world, that's sometimes that's when a line of poetry or a thought that you need to write down and capture
Yes.
will come, and just the words fall into the right order suddenly when they've just been scattered.
Yes. Sometimes the not trying is when things settle and
Certainly.
come, and yeah, I always carry something to write with.
Oh, of course.
Naturally.
Doesn't everybody?
You'd be surprised. Well, okay, we've covered a lot of ground. What haven't I asked you that you'd want to share with our audience?
Well, I would just like to encourage people to just write and to trust the process and to let what needs to be written
Mm.
and not to interrogate it. Just, I think that,
Yeah.
that's a way of giving yourself permission just to find the space that you need, especially as we're talking about these devastating, inexplicable events. Writing is a way of, yeah, yes, finding the narrative and the center again.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I hope folks will give it a try or, pick it up again and now with a little bit more direction. I know you also recommend sometimes writing in a group or a circle.
Yes, yes, because of the power of hearing your words received by others and receiving other people's words.
I think that's really special, and I wanted to make sure we just touched on it before we concluded.
Yes.
Um, you could have a little journaling group. Would you center it around a topic, or would you just come together and write each week?
Either is great. I've run groups for people who were adopted, and sharing
Ah,
their stories and using writing as another way of processing it has been so powerful because there's so much in common, but there's so much that's unique.
yes, yes, and I think that's what we find when we get into those groups that are, specifically for loss or for adoption, as you say, or for
Yeah.
anything that, yes, we have both that commonality, um, and everyone's experience is their own.
Yes, and everybody's words are their own, but they can be shared and taken in.
And so many times we hear someone else's thoughts and we say, oh, yes, that's it. That's what I couldn't name, or I couldn't figure it out. So it
Yes.
could be just so helpful to share experiences.
And isn't that what poetry does? It puts something that we haven't been able to put into words. It gives it the right words that, you know, express our experience.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Well, Kate, that was beautiful. I really appreciate your time. If people want to learn more about you, find you, read your books, where can they get everything?
Um, my website, katethompsontherapy.com. Um, if you look for my books, you can find them on Amazon. Yes.
Yes,
And I'd be
I
really,
read one.
oh, yes. People can reach out to me by email or, they find me online and send me a message. I'd love to hear what people's experiences are.
Wonderful. And are you still taking private clients or
I certainly am. I have a private practice here in Boulder, Colorado, in person, but I also work online. I
okay.
work with people all over the world.
Yeah, that's the great thing about coming online. We can meet and connect with so many different people.
And writing works really well online.
I think that would be fun.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. We're gonna link all of that in the show notes, your website, and encourage people to reach out and share their reflections on this very special episode. Definitely went surprising places I didn't expect, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And thank you for sharing your beautiful poem.
Thank you.